Hi, I'm Joel Butterly. I am the co-founder and CEO of InGenius Prep. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal story as it relates to interviews. The interview process that I went through for Dartmouth College and other schools that I interviewed for, like Harvard and Princeton, and then also the interview process for law schools when I was interviewing for law schools. Just as a background, I went to Dartmouth College and then I went to Yale Law School after that. Understanding the interview process. At a very high level, most interviews for most kinds of programs, certainly undergraduate programs and most graduate programs, this does not apply to every program. And it certainly doesn't apply to things like boarding schools, for example, like boarding high schools, where interviews can be very important. But for the most part, when you're talking about colleges, interviews are really more an opportunity to get rejected than they are an opportunity to get accepted. You probably are either doing nothing for your chances or you're hurting your chances if you make several mistakes. That's important to a significant degree because really the requirements that you need to meet in order to not harm your chances are relatively low. In most cases, there's not going to be a performance that you can put on that are going to meaningfully change your chances of admission. The actual interviews themselves. For college, I did interviews with Dartmouth and Harvard and Princeton and Yale. I probably did one for Cornell. They varied a little bit, mostly based on how engaged and how warm the person was that was interviewing me. For the most part, they're asking pretty generic questions. It's not like they're sitting there trying to trick you, but they're asking you things like, why are you interested in this school? And it's important that you have some research on the school and understand what makes it distinctive. If you're interviewing for a school like Princeton, you're like, well, world-class students and faculty. That could apply to basically any school in the top 30, probably beyond. So that's not really going to demonstrate that you have specific knowledge. Things like, I really want to take this class, or I really want to work with this professor, or I really like this department, or this is a student group that I'm particularly interested in. That's the sort of stuff that really showcases specific knowledge, and that probably speaks to how sincere they find your interest in the school, which in turn might mean that they believe that if you are admitted, you actually will attend. They will often ask about your interests, your passions, your life goals. Probably the most important part of this is they'll usually ask you, do you have any questions for me? And the worst thing you can do is say no. What they're trying to gauge with these interviews are you normal? Are you going to make people uncomfortable on campus? They're going to check that you're not incredibly arrogant. That's a huge mistake. Students who come in and try to just push their impressive credentials and qualifications on the interviewer, they hate that. So they're not looking for that. They're looking if you're emotionally mature. A mature person is able to have a conversation with an adult. So the adult asks you a question, you ask them a question. When they respond to the question, you follow up on it. You don't just list off questions that you've memorized. They're looking for students who are engaged, like who are not so shy that they can't hold a conversation, although obviously there's a range of introversion and extroversion among students. They want students who have a genuine interest or passion, both in the school itself, but also what field they ultimately want to pursue, as opposed to a student who is just accruing accomplishments because they think that's what you're supposed to do. They want students who are like, I am genuinely passionate about mechanical engineering, and here's why, and this is what I want to do with it. So in the same way that they look for that on the personal statement. But again, these are interviews to get rejected, not to get accepted. So as long as you go in, you're relatively normal, you know something about the school, you have a normal conversation with the interviewer, you're not going to do any harm to yourself, and it's not going to do you much good. It's not going to meaningfully improve your chances of getting in. Again, there are exceptions, but those are the exceptions that prove the rule. Yale Law School did not have an interview, which I thought was a mistake because there were a few people who I suspect probably would not have gotten admitted had they been interviewed for even 2 minutes. There were some real idiosyncratic characters at Yale Law School. Harvard Law School did have an interview, but it was a 5-minute phone call with an admissions officer, as opposed to the college interviews usually done with alumni of the school. Not always, but often. It was really basic questions. It was literally 5 minutes. Didn't have an interview for any other law school that I can remember. I'm not sure if that remains the case. I would guess it does, or is still the case. In any event, that's the interview process generally. Again, it's like people get very worked up about the interview, and I think the important thing to understand is this: it's a really low threshold for what you need to do to not hurt your chance. You're not going to go in and blow them away. This other kid who's much more charming than you isn't going to get admitted because of the interview. They don't really matter. Best of luck on your interviews. You can practice for your interview by having regular conversations with adults about their life and the schools that they went to and whether they like it. All right, we will talk to you soon. If you have any questions, please leave us comments and we'll send another video.